The knife hit the plate with a sharp, embarrassing clang just as my father said the word idiot. I smelled buttercream and coffee and someone's strong cologne from the next table. The DJ's colored lights pulsed weakly against the low ceiling of the banquet hall, fighting with the warm yellow glow of the sconces. It should have felt cozy. It felt like a spotlight. "This man is a joke," Dad finished, his voice booming through the borrowed speakers. Laughter rippled across the room, thin and nervous. Some people chuckled like they were obligated. Others stared into their drinks. I watched the tendons in my husband's jaw jump as he froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Daniel went pale. Not combat pale. He'd been shot at in sandstorms and kept color in his face. This was something else. The kind of drained white that happens when someone punches your soul and everyone watches. I could still taste lemon from the cake on my tongue, suddenly sour. Dad stood at the mic in his too-tight navy blazer, tie already crooked, cheeks flushed the exact color they got after his second whiskey. He waved the microphone like it was an extension of his hand, owning the room the way he always had at church potlucks and Rotary dinners. "I mean, look at him," he said, jerking his chin toward Daniel. "A Marine who can't even change a tire without calling my daughter, right, honey?" More laughter. This time louder, safe, directed. I felt 50 pairs of eyes slide to me at the head table. I hadn't told Dad that story. Daniel had no idea what was coming until the words hit him. I could tell by the way his shoulders locked. "That was a rental Jeep on a lava field in Hawaii," I said under my breath. Too low for the mic, my voice coming out thin. "It wasn't a tire, it was the axle." Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at his hands, knuckles white around the fork. The overhead light glittered off our new rings. Beside Dad, the DJ shifted awkwardly by his booth, fingers flexing near the soundboard as if he wanted to rescue the mic and didn't dare. My mother sat ramrod straight at table 2, lips pressed into a perfect pink line, eyes fixed on the linen cloth as if staring hard enough at the centerpiece might make her husband's voice disappear. Dad laughed at his own joke, breath fogging the mic grill. "Just kidding, of course," he said, with the same tone he'd used my whole life after dropping something cruel. "Just being honest. Naomi knows her old man tells it like it is." My middle name dropped like an anchor. Honest. Truth. Just kidding. The holy trinity of his excuses. He swung his gaze back to us. "Seriously, though," he went on, swaying a little. "Naomi, she's always been tough, Navy tough, you all know that. I've seen her stand up straighter than any man I've worked with. That's why it breaks my heart a little, seeing her marry someone who—" He let the sentence hang, then shrugged with exaggerated helplessness. "Well, you can all see." The laugh this time hurt my ears. The hall shrank around me, the scent of coffee turned acrid. The air felt thick, like the inside of a ship's engine room before the AC kicks in. I heard my little sister Rachel's chair scrape somewhere behind me. "Dahan didet," she said. Her voice was small, swallowed by the echo. He steamrolled right past it. "I told her last night," he said loudly, as if he were proud of this part, "that she could do better, that she's making a mistake. And I stand by that. A real man." His words blurred at the edges. I wasn't in the hall anymore. I was 13 again, watching Thanksgiving napkins scatter to the floor in slow motion as he flipped the table because the turkey was dry. I was 16, hearing him laugh at my acceptance letter. "A Navy? You think you're cut out for that?" I was 22, standing under my graduation photo in the hallway while he told me the uniform didn't make me any less of a disappointment. The weight of every time I'd stayed quiet pressed against my ribs. My hands started to shake. Not the fine tremor I got after too much caffeine on watch, but a deep, muscular tremor that started somewhere around my spine. Daniel shifted in his seat at my side. He turned his head just slightly, enough that I could see the raw edge of humiliation in his eyes. Not because he couldn't take an insult. Marines are born into insults. But because it came from the man who had just walked me down the aisle, jaw clenched, fingers like a vice on my arm. "I'm okay," Daniel murmured. "Navy taught me to read lips." I caught the words even under the noise. "It's fine." It wasn't fine. He was lying for me. I looked around. Church friends, neighbors from our northern Ohio cul-de-sac. Daniel's unit buddies, stiff in their dress blues. My commanding officer, trying to keep his face neutral and failing. Every one of them had just watched my father try to swat my husband like an ant on our wedding day. My wedding. My throat closed. Fight, flight, freeze. The holy trinity I'd been drilled on in training. In the Gulf, with alarms blaring and the smell of electrical smoke in the air, I'd always gone straight to fight or fix. At home, in this house with this man, I'd always frozen. An old, familiar voice whispered in my head, "Don't make it worse. Don't embarrass him. Don't ruin it." Another voice, newer, the one I'd grown on steel decks and in cramped wardrooms, spoke over it. "You are an officer. You know how to handle a microphone." Dad leaned in, gearing up for another joke. "And if this doesn't work out..." My chair scraped back so suddenly it made a harsh squeal against the wood. Conversation hiccuped. I stood. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, the urge to sit back down nearly crushed me. Daniel's hand brushed mine under the table. "You don't have to," he whispered. He meant it. That was the point. "I know," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, steady in a way my hands weren't. I smoothed my dress with my palms, feeling the beaded lace under my fingers like chainmail. Then I walked. Past the head table, past my mother's stunned face, past Rachel's wide eyes and Mr. Henderson's frown at table 6. The music lights strobed blue and red and green against the walls, turning the hall into a low-budget war zone. The DJ's booth smelled like warm electronics and the faint plastic tang of his headphones. Dad was still holding the microphone when I reached him, fingers wrapped around it like he owned air. "Dad," I said quietly enough that only he and the DJ heard. "I'll take the mic." He blinked at me, drunk confusion and something like challenge in his eyes. "I'm not finished," he said. 8 words. A lifetime's pattern. He never was. I met the DJ's gaze. He looked between us once, then made a decision. "Sir," the DJ said, reaching for the mic, "let the bride have a word." For a second, I thought my father might refuse. Then he released his grip. The microphone was warm where his hand had been. I turned toward the room. The lights felt hotter on my bare shoulders. The mic cable tugged against the floor, a thin black snake connecting me to the booth, to the speakers, to every pair of ears in the hall. I lifted the microphone, heard the tiny pop as it picked up my breath. "Hi," I said. The word sounded too small, but the silence that followed it was absolute. Every fork stilled. Every laugh died. In the back, someone's baby fussed and was quickly shushed. My father stood off to the side now, red-faced, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. My husband sat at the head table, hands folded, eyes locked on me. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat thudding through the mic. "I'm Naomi Briggs," I said, my voice gaining strength on the second sentence. "Lieutenant, United States Navy. And today, I became Naomi Cole, Daniel's wife." I let that sink in, watched the shift in a few faces. "And I think it's time," I added, "that I told you who my father really is." Someone dropped a fork. It hit the floor with a sharp metallic ting, the perfect, awful punctuation. No one laughed. No one moved. For the first time in 30 years, I had the mic, and he didn't, and I wasn't planning to hand it back. The microphone felt heavy in my hand, but the weight behind it was older than this hall. Before I could open my mouth, my eyes snagged on the far wall, on the framed print of a harvest scene, orange and gold and safe. For a second, it blurred, and another table, another room slid over this one like a bad transparency. Our dining room, Northern Ohio. I was 10. The air smelled like turkey and sage and lemon pledge. Mom had ironed the tablecloth 3 times. The good napkins, embroidered leaves, were folded like little fans next to every plate. I'd spent an hour lining up the silverware. Forks left, knives right. Salad fork outside. I'd used a ruler for the spacing. Precision felt like love back then. Dad walked in, tie already loosened, cheeks flushed from taste testing the wine. He looked at the table and snorted. "What's this?" he said. "A proper setting," I'd answered, too proud, too bright. "Like in the book." He picked up a napkin between 2 fingers, looked at it like it had offended him, then flicked his wrist. The napkin fluttered to the floor. "Real families don't need this nonsense," he said. You trying to impress someone, Naomi? You think you're fancy now? He swept his arm across the edge of the table, sending 3 more napkins tumbling. One caught the gravy boat. It wobbled, sloshing brown liquid onto the runner. Mom gasped and dove for it with a dish towel. It's fine, Tom, she said quickly. She was just helping. He grabbed the chair at the head of the table and dragged it back, the legs shrieking against the floor. Don't encourage her, he muttered, sitting. Last thing we need is another girl with her head in the clouds thinking she's better than everyone. I remember the heat in my face, the way the starch in the tablecloth suddenly felt stiff and stupid under my fingers. I thought I'd started. He'd leaned back, smirked, and said, I'm just being honest, kiddo. No one's going to tell you the truth like your old man. Everyone chuckled nervously. I picked up the napkins from the floor in silence and folded them into plain rectangles. That was the first time I realized honest in his mouth meant hurtful with a halo. The memories came in flashes, sharp as the crackle of the speakers in the hall. I was 12, carrying my first honor roll certificate home, the paper still warm from the copier. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and coffee. He'd glanced at it once. Always knew you were a nerd, he said, dropping it on the counter. Good, somebody's got to pay for my retirement. I was 17, standing in the hallway under that same harvest print, clutching the acceptance packet with Naval Academy stamped across the top. My heart had been pounding with a kind of wild hope I'd never felt. He'd looked at the crest, then at me. You? He said. You think you're cut out for that? I can try, I'd said. He laughed, a short barking sound. Don't come crying to me when you wash out, he said. Those people will chew you up. Better get used to being disappointed now. Mom had stood at the sink, back turned, hands motionless in the dishwater. She murmured, Tom, but it was air, not a boundary. When I left for basics, she cried into my shoulder until my shirt went cold and wet. He'd hugged me with one arm and whispered in my ear, don't embarrass us. At the academy, the air smelled different, salt and metal and possibility. The first time a company officer chewed me out for a mistake, he ended with, fix it, not, what's wrong with you? It stunned me so much I almost forgot to say, well, sir. Weeks turned into months. I learned to stand at attention, to run until my lungs burned, to strip and reassemble a rifle by feel. I learned that leadership could be loud without being cruel, quiet without being weak, that you could correct someone's course without crushing their spine. On the rare calls home, Dad always found the splinter to shove his thumb into. How's the toy soldier thing? He'd ask. Still playing dress up? When I got my commission, he didn't come to the ceremony. He called afterward to say traffic would have been a nightmare anyway. Mom mailed me a card with a $20 bill tucked inside. I kept it between the pages of my damage control manual, like a pressed leaf. Years later, after too many nights on gray water and too many mornings waking to the sour scent of spilled coffee and CIC, I met Daniel at a community center food drive. I wasn't supposed to be there. My CO had given us a long weekend. Most of the division went to bars or bed. I signed up to stack cans because work had always felt safer than rest. The gym smelled like dust and canned tomato sauce. Fluorescent lights warred with winter light through dirty windows. Folding tables groaned under rows of green beans and cranberry sauce. He was at the far end of the line, quiet, sleeves rolled, hands steady. While everyone else moved boxes like they were competing, he stacked them in perfect columns, making sure the labels faced out so whoever came later could see exactly what they were getting. You're making us look bad, I'd joked, reaching for a crate. He'd grinned, quick, crooked. Nah, he said. Just don't want some grandma opening peaches when she thought she was getting soup. His eyes had been warm. The kind of warm that said, I see you, not I'm measuring you. We'd spent 3 hours stacking and hauling, our shoulders bumping occasionally, the smell of cardboard dust clinging to our clothes. When the last can was in place, he'd wiped his hands on his jeans and said, I'm Daniel, civil engineer. I meddle with roads for a living. You? Naomi, I'd said. Navy. I meddle with logistics. Sounds like we both try to keep things from collapsing, he'd replied. It was the first time a man had described my work as something sturdy, not a hobby. Bringing him home was like introducing a new dog into a house with an old, territorial one. Dad sized him up at the door, the smell of grilling burgers drifting in from the backyard. "So you're the Marine," he'd said, eyes narrowing. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. "Staff sergeant, now civilian, working with the county." Dad had snorted. "Civilian," he said, "so you quit." Daniel's jaw had tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I completed my contract," he said. "Now I build bridges instead of blowing them up." Dad had looked at me, then at him. "Real men don't leave the fight early," he muttered as he walked away. Mom had set out the plates, hands shaking slightly, and whispered, "Just keep the peace, honey." At dinner, Dad grilled him about salary, debt, credit score. "How much you make?" he'd asked, stabbing his fork into the potato salad. "Enough to cover my bills and save," Daniel said, "and enough that she won't have to financially babysit me like she's been doing with half of you." I'd nearly choked on my corn. Dad's eyes had gone flinty. After they left that night, I'd overheard him on the phone in the kitchen with some cousin, voice low but words clear through the thin wall. "He's not one of us," Dad had said. "Soft, talks back. She's marrying beneath her." I'd stood in the hallway under my Navy graduation photo, the frame catching a slice of hallway light, and realized the rank on my shoulder didn't mean anything inside these walls. When Daniel proposed, it was quiet. No rooftop, no string lights, just our cramped rental kitchen, the smell of tomato sauce and garlic between us, his calloused fingers cold around mine as he held out a small, simple ring. "I don't have your father's approval," he said, "but I have mine, and I hope I have yours." "You do," I'd said, my throat tight. "I'll take yours over his any day." We told my parents over Sunday dinner. Mom cried. Dad didn't. He'd taken a long sip of beer, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and said, "Your funeral." Later, I found out he'd called relatives and quietly told them not to feel obligated to come because Naomi's making a mistake and we don't want to enable it. Most of them came anyway. Guilt and curiosity are strong motivators. The night before the wedding, the house smelled like stale coffee and hairspray. There were garment bags hanging from door frames. My bouquet lay in a plastic tub of water in the sink. Rachel dozed on the couch under a throw blanket, TV light flickering across her face. I'd gone to the hallway to straighten a crooked frame, a habit I'd never shaken. My Navy graduation photo stared back at me. Uniform crisp, eyes bright, the gold bars on my shoulders a promise. Dad's reflection appeared behind mine in the glass. "Naomi," he said, "we need to talk." His voice was too soft. That was how I knew I couldn't outrun this one. We stood under the line of family photos, me in pigtails, Rachel in braces, Mom on a beach, Dad holding up a fish. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and the lemon cleaner Mom liked. "You still have time," he said, "to call this off." My stomach lurched. "I'm not calling anything off," I said. "The cake is paid for. The guests are in town. I love him." He snorted. "You love an idea," he said, "of safety, of softness. You're a fighter, Naomi. You need someone who can stand toe-to-toe with me, not some quiet little boy who looks to you to make all the decisions." "He doesn't," I said. "We're partners." "Partners," he repeated like it tasted bad. "He's not a real man. He'll embarrass you. People will laugh. They're already laughing. You want that? When it blows up, don't expect me to pretend I didn't warn you." He stepped closer, breath hot with beer. "And tomorrow," he added, "if you walk down that aisle, I won't clap. I won't smile. I won't fake it for your benefit." Something in my chest cracked. "Then don't," I said, even as my throat closed. "But I'm still walking." He stared at me for a long moment. "You think your Navy rank means anything here?" he said quietly. "It doesn't. You're still my little girl, and I'm telling you, Tom," Mom's voice cut from the kitchen. "Leave her be." He glanced toward the doorway, jaw flexing. "We'll see," he muttered, and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. Later, at the kitchen table that still smelled faintly of onions and dish soap, Mom reached across the laminate and took my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. He hates anything he can't control. That's not on you. I can handle it, I said automatically. Her eyes met mine, tired and sharper than usual. Don't let him steal this, she said. Your happiness, your day, your life. Promise me. It was the only time I'd ever heard her even skirt the edge of defiance. I promise, I'd said. At the time, I thought not letting him steal it meant getting through the vows without crying when he refused to smile. I hadn't realized the real test would come 12 hours later, under reception lights, with his hand on a microphone and my husband shrinking next to me. Back in the hall, the weight of all that pressed against the back of my eyes, hot and stinging. The microphone hummed in my hand. My father stood off to the side, arms crossed, trying to look like a man in control of the narrative. He wasn't. Not anymore. I lifted my chin, the way I did when giving a brief on the bridge. The smell of coffee and frosting and too many bodies in one room filled my lungs. You've heard a lot about my dad's honesty tonight, I said, voice steadying with each word. How he tells it like it is. Eyes widened. People shifted in their seats. In this family, I went on, looking straight at him, we've confused cruelty with truth for a very long time. Behind me, I felt Daniel sit up a little straighter. Beside the dance floor, I saw Rachel's hand fly to her mouth. Mr. Henderson at table 6, who'd watched me grow up on that cul-de-sac, leaned forward, eyes sharp for the first time all night. I used to think staying quiet kept the peace, I said. But all it did was keep one person comfortable. The room held its breath. I could feel my father's stare like heat on my skin. I kept my voice calm, trained, controlled. The thing about microphones, I added, fingers tightening slightly around the metal, is that they don't belong to whoever grabs them first. I let that sit there, humming through the speakers and the old patterns. And tonight, I said, I'm done giving mine away. The hall didn't move. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, a tray clinked softly against a metal cart. I drew a breath, feeling 30 years funnel into my lungs. If you want to know who my father really is, I said quietly, we should start with the night he almost lost our house at the casino and told everyone he was teaching us not to count on money. A murmur went through the room like wind through corn. Dad's face blanched, the red draining fast. He took a step forward. Naomi, he barked. I held up a hand, palm toward him. Dad, I said, you've had the mic my whole life. My next words tasted like steel and freedom. It's my turn. For a second after I said, it's my turn, I thought my legs might give. They didn't. Years of standing through 12-hour watches on steel decks had trained them better than that. The hall smelled like roast beef, frosting, and cheap champagne. Underneath it, I caught the metallic tang of my own adrenaline at the back of my throat. I tightened my fingers around the mic. You've heard my dad call it honesty when he cuts people down, I said. But here's what that honesty has looked like in our house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The speakers did that for me. When I was 14, I went on, I woke up to Mom sobbing in the kitchen. The house reeked of stale beer. There were casino receipts fanned out on the table. My dad had taken the mortgage payment and lost it at the blackjack table. The same man who has never let me forget a late library book lost our home in one night and told us it was a lesson. A chair creaked loudly somewhere near the back. I saw my mother flinch, one hand flying to her throat. Dad's shoulders tensed, fists curling at his sides. That's not, he started. I pivoted the mic just enough that my breath popped softly in the speakers. It is, I said. Mom called Grandma for help. I took on a part-time job at 15. Every shift I worked after school, I told myself we were all a team. Meanwhile, he told everyone at church he'd salvaged the house with his financial genius. Scattered gasps, a murmured, I wondered about that, from someone near the dessert table. I felt a strange calm settle over me like the centered quiet before a firefight. In my first year of deployment, I continued, I sent money home. Dust, heat, 16-hour days, and I still logged into my account from a ship halfway around the world and wired funds because Mom said things were tight. I looked right at my father. You told the neighbors you were helping me, I said, that you were keeping your girl afloat while she chased a uniform. In reality, I was covering the overdrafts from more honesty at the poker table. Mr. Henderson closed his eyes briefly, jaw working. He'd lived next door through all of it. Dad's face had gone a waxy gray under the flush. Enough, he snapped. His voice echoed, harsh and naked without his usual smirk. You don't air family business in public. I felt the wood grain of the mic stand under my free hand, grounding me. Family business, I repeated. You mean the part where you told my fiancé last night that you wouldn't clap for our marriage? That you warned me I was ruining my life and refused to smile as we walked down the aisle? The room rustled. Daniel's CO shifted in his seat, skin tightening around his eyes. Daniel sat very still, but his gaze never left me. Here's the thing, I said. You've told this room tonight that you're just telling it like it is. You've called Daniel an idiot. A joke. Said I could do better. You left out the part where the only reason we're all sitting in this hall is because he and I worked second jobs, skipped vacations, and pinched every dollar to pay for it ourselves, while you gambled and mocked. My father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. This man, I said, turning slightly toward the head table, has driven 3 hours in the middle of the night to jump my car in a grocery store parking lot because my battery died after a 12-hour shift. He's held my hand through surgery and brushed my hair out of my face when I threw up from anesthesia, not once complaining about missing a day of work. Heat prickled behind my eyes. I blinked it back. He has shown up for my command changes, I added, for my late flights, for the nights when the memories from deployment won't let me sleep. I looked at Daniel. His throat bobbed. And you? I said, shifting back to my father. You called the Navy dress up and missed my commissioning because traffic might be bad. Someone near table 8 made a soft, disbelieving sound. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you, I continued, voice steady. You did that yourself when you picked up that microphone and chose to make fun of my husband in front of our families on our wedding day. I could feel my sister Rachel's gaze burning into the back of my shoulders. I didn't turn. I needed the focus forward. You like to say you're just honest, Dad, I said. Here's some honesty back. You confuse volume with bravery. You think tearing people down makes you strong. But calling someone weak doesn't make you powerful. It just makes the room smaller. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The DJ had gone very still. Even the hum of the ice machine from the bar seemed to fade. My husband is not perfect, I said. Neither am I, but he has never once tried to make himself taller by cutting me at the knees. He has never called my service a joke. He has never thrown a tantrum at a table because the turkey was dry. He has never gambled away rent and called it a teachable moment. I let my eyes sweep the room. Over church friends who'd only ever seen Dad in pressed khakis and a ready joke. Over cousins who'd heard whispers but never the whole thing said out loud. Over Daniel's Marines' brows furrowed, seeing a dynamic they recognized from houses far from here. I'm not asking you to pick sides between me and my father tonight, I said, but I am drawing a line. My hand tightened on the microphone, the metal cool against my palm. If you want to be in our lives, I said, addressing my father directly, it will not be on the condition that I laugh when you humiliate my husband. It will not be on the condition that I stay quiet while you weaponize shame and call it truth. I will not raise children to believe that love looks like being cut down at the dinner table. My voice dipped on that last sentence. I heard the waver, but I didn't let it crack. You wanted to be honest tonight, I said, softer now. So here's my honest assessment. As your daughter, and as an officer who has seen good leaders and bad ones. I inhaled. The air smelled like frosting, sweat, and the faint, bitter twist of spilled beer. Today, I said, you didn't embarrass Daniel. You embarrassed yourself. Silence, not the comfortable kind. The dense, electric kind you get on a ship right before a storm hits, when everyone is waiting to see if the lightning came too close. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape. Rachel's by the sound of it. She'd always pushed her chair too far back. Naomi, Dad growled. That's enough. Dick, Tom, Dad. All of his names burned on my tongue. I didn't say any of them. It is, I agreed. That's all I needed to say. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, from table 6, I heard slow clapping. One pair of hands. Mr. Henderson. He was 80-something now, his hair thinner, his back more bent, but his hands still came together with the same steady rhythm I remembered from softball games and school plays. Clap, clap, clap. The sound cut through the frozen air like a metronome. At table 3, one of Daniel's Marines joined in, palms meeting with a crisp, precise sound, like a salute you could hear. Then someone else, and someone else. The applause built. Not a roaring standing ovation, not some movie moment explosion, but a rough, uneven swell of hands that said, "We heard you. We see this. We're not pretending we didn't." Some people didn't clap. They sat rigid, eyes flicking between me and my father, loyalty and discomfort warring on their faces. That was fine. The point wasn't unanimous approval. It was that the silence that had protected him for 3 decades had finally been broken, and nothing would sound the same again. I looked at Daniel, his lips parted like he might speak. He didn't. His eyes were wet. He lifted his glass slightly in a small, private toast. To me. To us. To the fact that I'd found a voice in a hall that had always belonged to him. I set the microphone gently on the DJ's table. The plastic was smooth and faintly sticky under my fingertips from some earlier spilled drink. The speakers gave a soft pop as the DJ turned the volume down. Dad stood with his arms locked across his chest, jaw clenched so tight the muscles fluttered. He wasn't the only man in the room anymore. And he wasn't the only voice. Without a word, he shoved his chair back so hard it squealed. The sound made several people jump. He walked past me, cologne and whiskey trailing behind him, and headed for the exit, shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. Ellen reached for his sleeve. "Tom," she whispered. He shook her off and kept going. The banquet hall doors swung open with a loud, hollow thud and snapped shut behind him. For a moment, the only sounds were the fading echo and the rustle of people shifting, recalibrating. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were still shaking, but my knees held. Daniel stood up from the head table. He walked over to me, his shoes scuffing against the polished floor. He didn't go for the microphone. He went for my hand. "You okay?" he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. I looked up at him. "Not yet," I said. "But I'm..." Finally pointed in the right direction. He nodded, thumb brushing over my knuckles, grounding me more than any podium ever had. Behind us, the DJ cleared his throat into a now muted mic. He said awkwardly. "Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to the bride and groom." A few people laughed, the tension breaking, messy and real. I turned to the crowd. "Eat cake," I said, voice hoarse but steady. "Dance if you want, or just sit and talk, but whatever you do, don't pretend you didn't hear what you just heard, not for me, not for him, for yourselves." Then I stepped off the little platform, skirt whispering against my legs, and let Daniel walk me outside into the cold night air that smelled like wet pavement and freedom. The cold hit me like surf. The second the banquet hall doors swung shut behind us, the smell of roast beef and spilled beer was replaced by wet asphalt, cigarettes, and crisp Ohio night. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, turning the puddles into warped mirrors of sodium orange. I could still hear the muffled hum of voices through the door like a radio tuned slightly off station. I braced my hands on my knees and sucked in a breath. My dress rustled around my legs. The lace scratched the back of my calves. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped as someone hit unlock. Daniel stood beside me, one hand on my back, not rubbing, just present. "You were incredible," he said quietly. My laugh came out sharp. "I feel like I might throw up in my hair," I said. "If I had any left from the hairspray." He smiled, brief and crooked, the way he did before walking into a tough meeting. "That's adrenaline," he said. "It'll pass." I straightened slowly, the bodice tugging against my ribs. Out here, without my father's voice bouncing off the walls, the world felt wider, a little less dangerous, a little more mine. The door opened behind us with a burst of light and muffled music. "Naomi!" Rachel's voice. She hurried over, heels clicking on the concrete, clutching the hem of her dress so it didn't drag through a puddle. The cold turned her breath into little white puffs. Her eyes were huge. "You okay?" she asked, glancing between us. "No," I said honestly, "but I don't regret it." She let out a shaky laugh. Somebody had to do it, she said. I just didn't think it would be in front of the chicken marsala. I snorted. Timing's never been my strength, I said. That's a lie, Daniel put in. Your timing is impeccable. He picked the stage. You picked the moment. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. You know he's going to say you ruined the wedding, she said. To everyone who will listen. My stomach turned. Let him, I said. He's been narrating my life his way for 30 years. Tonight, he finally had to hear my version, whether he liked it or not. The door thumped open again. Mom stepped halfway out, the golden light from inside spilling around her and stopping just before it reached my shoes. She hugged her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, even though the night wasn't that cold. Naomi, she said. Daniel, can we? Her eyes were wet and wide, but there was something else there too, a kind of stripped bare look, like someone whose makeup had washed off in the rain and never got reapplied. Rachel squeezed my arm and drifted back toward the door, giving us space. I took a breath. Sure, I said. Here's good. Mom came fully outside and let the door close behind her. The music cut again, replaced by the hum of the parking lot lights and the distant hiss of traffic from the highway. He left, she said. Your father. I nodded. I figured, I said. Hard to stay in a room where the script changes. She winced. Naomi. Her voice trembled. You said a lot in there. So did he, I replied. For years, nobody stopped him. Her shoulders slumped. I should have, she whispered. I should have so many times. The admission hit harder than any defense would have. You were surviving, I said. I get it. I'm not here to put you on trial. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes swimming. Then, to my surprise, she let out a tiny laugh. You sound like a lawyer, she said. All those Navy briefs. Occupational hazard, I said. She took a step closer. It wasn't right, she said. What he said, tonight, all those years. The words came haltingly, like they'd been trapped in her throat a long time. I know you loved him, she added quickly. Love him. I did too. Do. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them cut you up like that, in front of everyone. I swallowed. Then why didn't anyone say anything? I asked. It came out less accusing than pleading. She hugged herself tighter, cardigan pulled taut. Because if we did, she said quietly, we were next. But the simplicity of it stole my breath. She glanced back at the door. When you stood up tonight, she went on, I thought, oh God, it's happening. The thing I've been afraid of and praying for. Afraid of and praying for? I repeated. She nodded, a small, jerky motion. I was scared for you, she said. Because I know how big his anger can get, but I was also relieved. Because I knew if anyone could stand there and not crumble, it was you. Navy or not, you've always been the brave one. The old, familiar instinct to say no, I'm not, rose and fell. I let it pass. I didn't feel brave, I admitted. I felt like I was going to pass out. Bravery doesn't mean not shaking, she said softly. It means standing anyway. She looked at Daniel then. I'm sorry, she told him, for what he said about you, for the way we let him. Daniel's jaw worked. Thank you, ma'am, he said. It hurt. But I've had worse from people who mattered less. She huffed a weak laugh at that. I hope, she said, that someday he can say those words himself. To you, to both of you. Someday, I said. For now, I need space. She nodded, eyes dropping to the asphalt. I understand, she said. I just want you to know, you didn't ruin tonight. She took a careful breath, the kind she used to take before saying something risky at church ladies' meetings. You saved something, she said. Maybe not for him, not yet, but for me, for Rachel, for any grandkids you have someday. You showed them it's possible to say enough and not die from it. My throat closed. I thought of my mother at the table last night, whispering, don't let him take your happiness. I meant it, she said, as if reading my mind. And I'm proud of you for listening, even if it blew up in our faces. A laugh escaped me, half sob, half relief. Pretty on brand for us, I said. Briggs family fireworks. She smiled, watery, and reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Her hand landed on my arm, light as a bird. I don't know what the next holidays will look like, she said, but I hope we can build something different, even if he isn't ready yet. Me too, I said. But I'm done pretending we're okay when we're not. That's the only rule. She nodded, more firmly this time. I can work with that, she said. Behind us, the DJ put on some Motown, the bass thumping gently through the doors. Mom took a step back. I should go in, she said. There's a cake cutting to finish. People expect normal. Her lips twisted around the word. You don't have to perform for them either, I said. She gave me a small, rueful smile. One step at a time, she said. Tonight I watched my daughter do something I never could. Maybe next time I'll stand beside her sooner. She squeezed my arm once and went back inside, the light swallowing her. The door closed. The parking lot felt darker without the spill of the chandeliers. Rachel lingered by the door, then hustled over again, cheeks flushed. That was, she said, at a loss. I don't even have a word. Messy, I suggested. True, she said, finally. She glanced toward where our father's truck had been parked. He left, she confirmed. Didn't say goodbye, just stormed out. Uncle Joe tried to follow him. He shrugged him off. My chest ached in a familiar way. Abandonment hurt even when you expected it. Are you mad at me? I asked quietly. Her eyes snapped to mine, scandalized. No, she said. God, no, I'm proud. I wish I'd had your guts. I didn't want to still be living in that house when the bomb went off. I thought of her senior year, the way she'd swallowed every insult to keep the peace long enough to graduate. You did what you had to, I said. This wasn't your job. It was never my job either. But I was the one who had the training and a husband who'd catch me if I fell. Rachel's gaze flicked to Daniel. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. I'll call you tomorrow, she said, when things settle. Okay, I said. She hugged me quickly but tight, then darted back into the buzzing light. We stood in the lot a while longer, me and Daniel, our breaths making faint clouds. You sure you're ready to go back in there? He asked. I looked at the glowing doors, at the silhouettes moving behind frosted glass, at the sign with our names printed in script, slightly askew. I am, I said. But first, I reached down and slipped off my heels, the cold concrete biting into the soles of my feet, sending a clean shock up my legs. I held the shoes by their straps like trophies. I'm going to need traction, I said. Daniel laughed, the sound loosening the tightness in my chest. My wife, he said, always thinking tactically. We went back inside. The air hit me warm and loud, the scent of frosting and sweat and coffee wrapped around us. There was a hush when people saw us. Then tables started clapping again, softer this time. Not for a speech, for the fact that we came back. We finished cutting the cake, we danced. The DJ mispronounced our last name and we corrected him, laughing. People came up in twos and threes to squeeze my hand, to say thank you, to murmur, I had no idea. Mr. Henderson pressed a wrinkled hand over mine and said, we knew something was off. Took courage to say it all the way out loud. Proud of you, kid. By the time the candles burned low and the hall staff started stacking chairs, my adrenaline had drained and left a leaden fatigue in its place. In the car, shoes kicked off, dress bunched around my knees, the night pressing soft against the windows, Daniel laced his fingers through mine on the gear shift. I'm sorry, he said, that it had to happen today, this way. I stared at our joined hands, the metal of our rings catching a stray passing headlight. I'm not, I said. He glanced at me, surprised. If he'd waited a week, a month, a year, I probably would have swallowed it, I admitted. I would have told myself it wasn't worth ruining a holiday, or a birthday, or a random Tuesday. I would have kept shrinking to make him comfortable. I lifted our joined hands and kissed his knuckles. I'm glad he picked a day I refused to let him own, I said. It forced me to choose. Between him and my father, between silence and a life, between being the girl who let other people narrate and the woman who took the mic. Back at our small rental, with its secondhand couch and a sink full of dishes we'd deal with tomorrow, I hung my dress in the closet and stared at my Navy graduation photo on our own wall. Same uniform, same rank, different woman. Looking back, I thought about calling Dad. I didn't. Instead, I sat at our kitchen table, still smelling of cake and sweat and hairspray, pulled a pen toward me, and grabbed a sheet of lined paper. The wood grain pressed lightly into my forearm. "Dear Dad," I wrote. The pen hovered. I didn't know it then, but that letter, slow, careful, full of specifics and boundaries, would be the real aftershock of tonight. The one that would rattle his foundation long after the echo of my speech faded from the banquet hall walls. For now, I just wrote the first line. "You told me once that no one would ever tell me the truth like you." Then I underlined it. Twice. And under the hum of the fridge and the memory of clapping hands, I started to finally tell him mine. "You told me once that no one would ever tell me the truth like you." I stared at the sentence until the ink bled slightly into the paper, the words fuzzing at the edges. The kitchen smelled like day-old coffee and frosting, sweet and stale. My wedding bouquet lay on the counter in a glass vase, already starting to droop at the edges, petals softening. Daniel clinked dishes quietly in the sink behind me, giving me space but not distance. The pen felt strange in my hand. I was used to emails, memos, orders. Not this. I kept writing. So here's mine. I told him about the casino receipts, about the night I'd watched Mom crumple over the kitchen table like a napkin, and how I'd learned that lesson meant you suffer for my choices. I told him about sending money home from a rocking metal box halfway across the world while he told the neighbors he was supporting me. I told him how his voice had followed me into every wardroom and briefing, whispering, "Don't embarrass us," beneath every success. I didn't hurl the words like grenades. I lined them up like evidence. Specific dates, specific phrases, concrete actions. Navy training had taught me that vague accusations could be dodged. Details pin things down. I wrote about the Thanksgiving napkins, the ruined table, the way my 10-year-old fingers had picked fabric off the floor, thinking if I fold right, maybe he'll like me again. I wrote about the hallway the night before the wedding, his promise not to clap. I wrote about the reception, the mic, the way he'd called my husband an idiot in front of everyone we loved. Then I wrote the part my stomach clenched around. I wrote that I was grateful for the work he'd done when I was little, for the roof he'd kept over our heads in the days before casinos, for the rare times he'd driven me to practice or patched a bike tire right away, all of it. I wasn't interested in scrubbing him into a cartoon villain. That wasn't the point. The point was to tell the whole truth, including the parts that hurt me and the parts that had once helped. I ended with what mattered most. Going forward, future relationship with me will require basic respect toward me and Daniel. No insults, no public undermining, no gambling with money that affects us without transparency. There will be consequences if those lines are crossed. I put the period down with a little more force than I meant to. The letter wasn't long by Navy standards. 2 pages, front and back, handwritten, not typed. I signed it with my new name. Love, Naomi Briggs Cole. The new signature looked strange and right all at once. My hand cramped as I set the pen down. Daniel walked over, towel slung over one shoulder, smelling like dish soap and the faint spice of his deodorant. "Want me to read it?" he asked. "No," I said, then added, "Yes, please." He picked up the pages, careful not to smudge the ink, and leaned against the counter. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car drove past, tires hissing on wet pavement. As he read, his face didn't change much, but his jaw relaxed little by little. At one point, he huffed a breath that might have been a laugh, might have been a curse. When he finished, he set the paper down gently. "It's fair," he said, "and it's clear." "Too harsh?" I asked. "Not harsh enough for my taste," he said, mouth twitching, "but exactly right for yours." Something unclenched in my chest. "Okay," I said. "Then we send it." We folded the pages together. The envelope felt thin and heavy at the same time. Walking it to the blue mailbox at the end of our block felt like carrying a small, live explosive. Every step on the cracked sidewalk echoed more than it should have. The evening air smelled like damp leaves and someone grilling 2 houses over. A dog barked in the distance. At the box, I hesitated. "You can still rip it up," Daniel said. "No one knows it exists but us." I thought of the mic in my hand, the way the hall had gone quiet. I thought of Mom's eyes on the porch when she said she had been afraid and praying for that moment. Silence protects the one who harms. Truth protects the one who's been harmed. I slid the envelope into the slot. The metal lip clanged shut with a hollow final sound. "There it goes," I said. "Chain of command notified," Daniel said softly. We walked home hand in hand. Dad didn't respond the next day, or the day after, or the week after that. Mom's texts trickled in, small and careful. "Mom, we got your letter, we're reading it." "Mom, he's quiet." "Mom, I'm sorry, honey, I didn't ask for more. Part of me wanted to. Part of me knew that every time in the past I'd tried to read between the lines of her messages, I'd ended up building castles on fog. So I stuck to my side of the fence. I went back to base. The fluorescent hum of the office lights and the smell of paper and toner felt blessedly neutral compared to the charged air of the banquet hall. When people asked, "How was the wedding?" I said, "Beautiful and honest," and left it there. On weekends, Daniel and I slowly turned our rental into something that felt like ours. We bought a secondhand couch that squeaked when you sat in the middle, but held under the weight of both of us. We hung the Navy graduation photo in the hallway, this time next to a new one. Me and Daniel under the arch of the reception hall, his forehead pressed to mine, the mic nowhere in sight. We ate leftovers on the floor and argued about paint colors. At night, when the house was quiet, the letter haunted the edge of my thoughts. Had he crumpled it? Burned it? Read the first line and thrown it away? Each scenario played like a loop until I forced myself to turn toward what I could control. My patience. My sailors. My own voice. The first time a junior corpsman came into my office and said, "Ma'am, my dad keeps calling me weak for being in medical instead of combat arms." I heard my father's words in hers. I also heard my own response forming on an old, familiar script. "He's just from a different generation. Try not to let it get to you." I stopped myself. "Does it feel like love when he says it?" I asked instead. She blinked. "No," she said. "Feels like garbage." "Then it isn't love," I said. "You get to decide what rhythm your heart beats to, not him." Her eyes filled. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. After she left, I realized I'd just given her the thing I had needed at 20 and didn't get until 32. Permission to name harm without being called disloyal. Sometimes breaking a cycle meant saying to someone else what you wished someone had said to you. The first holiday came and went without an invitation. No call from Dad, a text from Mom on Thanksgiving morning, a photo of a turkey, no people in frame. "Mom, thinking of you today. Love you." I replied, "Me. You too. Hope it's peaceful." For once, I didn't feel guilty for not climbing into the car and driving 3 hours to carve a bird under his scrutiny. Ethan and I made spaghetti. We ate on mismatched plates at our wobbly table, the apartment full of garlic and music. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A picture from Rachel, herself and Mom at the table with paper plates and a rotisserie chicken. The caption, "Rachel, it's quieter. Weird. Not bad weird." I smiled. Cycles didn't snap in a day. They frayed. They gave way thread by thread. Tad. About 3 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday, when the sky over the base was a flat, unconvincing blue, and my inbox was a mess of labs and budget memos, I came home to find a shape on our front stoop. Daniel's car was in the driveway. The shape was not his. It was smaller, stooped, wrapped in an old windbreaker I recognized from years of cold bleachers and hardware store trips. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Shock? Fear. An absurd flash of annoyance that he was on my porch, in my space, unannounced. He stood when he heard the car door shut. The porch light caught the deep lines on his face, the gray at his temples more pronounced than it had been even 3 months ago. He held something in his hand. not a beer, not keys. A folded piece of paper, creased and softened like it had been opened and closed many times. Naomi, he said. My name, without a joke on its tail. I stood at the bottom of the steps, grocery bags still looped around my fingers, the plastic handles cutting into my skin. Dad, I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. Heavy. Familiar. We looked at each other across the weathered wood, like two people who'd been on opposite sides of a battlefield and weren't sure it was safe to cross. Can we talk? He asked. The old me would have said, of course, and ushered him in, heart racing, ready to change tone and topic at his first wince. This version of me remembered the letter in the mailbox's blue mouth. It depends, I said. Is it going to be you talking and me absorbing, or a conversation? His shoulders flinched. A conversation, he said. If you'll let me try. The word try caught my ear. Not fix, not explain. Try. I shifted the bags in my hands. We're not doing this in the yard, I said. Come inside. He stepped over the threshold like it might bite him, wiping his shoes carefully on the mat. The living room smelled like the candles I'd forgotten to blow out, cinnamon and something floral. Daniel appeared in the hallway, eyes scanning my face first, then the man behind me. He nodded, cautious. Mr. Briggs, he said. Tom, Dad, nodded back. Daniel, he said. Not Marine, not boy, just the name. We sat at the second-hand table, the wood scarred and solid. I put the grocery bags down. He set the folded paper in front of him. He didn't unfold it yet. For a moment, no one spoke. I broke the silence. Like, you got my letter, I said. He huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. I read your letter, he said. More times than I want to admit. He unfolded the paper. I recognized my handwriting, the lines a little faded now from repeated handling. I kept waiting to get mad enough to tear it up, he said. I'd read a piece and think, that's not how it was. Then I'd remember. That's exactly how it was. For you. He swallowed hard. He went on, talked to Pastor Jim and a therapist. Surprised myself with that one. A weak smile. They told me something I didn't want to hear. What's that? I asked. That I built my identity on being the guy who tells it like it is. But I never looked at the truth that didn't make me look good, he said. That I was more scared of being outgrown than of being wrong. The honesty in that sentence stunned me into silence. They said maybe, he added, I used you as a mirror. That every success you had that I didn't understand felt like a indictment of me. So I cut you down so I didn't have to feel small. He stared at his hands. I'm not saying that to excuse anything, he said quickly, glancing up. I'm saying it because you asked for honesty. I can't keep giving you the half-truth that makes me look sharp and you look fragile. The room was very quiet. The fridge hummed. A car drove past outside. I don't know how to be different overnight, he admitted. But I know this. What I said about you and Daniel at that mic was cruel, not honest, not just a joke. Cruel. He glanced at Daniel. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough. For calling you an idiot. For trying to make myself big by making you small. Daniel studied him for a long beat. Thank you, he said simply. That means something. Dad nodded. He turned back to me. And I'm sorry, he said, for every time I made you feel like your strength was a threat, not a gift. For missing your commissioning. For gambling the house. For letting you send money home from ships when I should have been sending it to you. For using tough love as an excuse for not loving you well. My eyes burned. The little girl who'd picked napkins off the floor wanted to jump up and hug him, to make it all okay, to erase the years in one go. The woman sitting at the table knew better. I appreciate you saying it, I said. I really do, but words are the start, not the finish. He nodded, acceptance rather than hurt in his eyes. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened, or to call me every day, or to invite me to Thanksgiving this year. He took a breath. I'm asking for a chance, he said, to earn some of it back, to learn how to be someone my grandkids, if you have them, aren't afraid of. He smiled, small and wry. The therapist said I couldn't undo 30 years in 3 months, he said. But I could start to shut my mouth when my first impulse is to make a joke at someone else's expense. I almost laughed at that, the image so opposite my lifelong experience. That's a good impulse, I said. Shutting your mouth. He nodded. Figured if I was willing to lose rent money to blackjack, he said, I can lose a few good punchlines to silence. Surprising myself, I snorted. We all laughed, the sound rusty and uneasy and real. Silence settled again, softer this time. I'm not ready to hand you a mic at any event I host, I said. But I'm okay starting with coffee, somewhere neutral, maybe once in a while. Ground rules like in the letter. No jokes at my expense. No undermining Daniel. No rewriting what happened at the wedding. He nodded eagerly, then caught himself and sobered. Deal, he said. You set the rules. I follow them. If I don't, you walk. No more talking you out of your boundaries. The idea of him not arguing that point slid into my chest like a piece of sunlight on cold water. Okay, I said. Then we try. He exhaled. The air in the room shifted, not magically healed, but a degree less charged. As he stood to go, the windbreaker rustled. On the porch under the dim bulb, he paused. Naomi, he said, no matter what happens, you did the right thing that night. His eyes shone. You took the mic, he said, and for the first time I had to listen. And the door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood in the entryway, hand on the knob, heart thudding, the smell of his aftershave lingering faintly in the air. Daniel came up behind me, slid an arm around my waist. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it. Tired, I said. Sad, hopeful, scared. So human, he said. Yeah, I said, human. He kissed the side of my head. You did good, Lieutenant, he murmured. I leaned back against him, listening to the quiet house, feeling the ripple of change low and slow. The girl in the hallway had finally been joined by the woman at the table. Both of them had been heard. The first time I saw him reach for a microphone and stop was 6 months later. In between, life settled into something that looked almost ordinary from the outside and completely new from the inside. We did coffee twice, neutral territory. A little diner off Route 6 that smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, with cracked red vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone hun. The first time, and he talked too much about the Browns, the weather, gas prices, every topic but the one hanging between us. I let him. Starting over with someone sometimes meant talking about nothing until you could talk about something. The second time that he caught himself. I told your Uncle Pete about the wedding, he said, then stopped, jaw clenching. And I told it wrong. Made it sound like you ambushed me. That was old habit talking. He looked me straight in the eye. I called him back, he said, told him the truth. Whole thing. Including the parts that make me look bad. I watched his hands. No fists, just fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, knuckles pale from the squeeze. Thank you, I said. It was a small sentence. It landed big. At home, life with Daniel was bills and laundry and shared grocery lists on the fridge. My Navy schedule pulled me into late nights and early mornings. His projects had him out on job sites, smelling like concrete dust and sun when he came home. Sometimes, when I brushed my teeth at the sink and caught my reflection with the Navy graduation photo behind me and Daniel's jacket on the hook, I felt like I was living someone else's life. A life where my choices weren't just reactions to someone else's voice. Fall crept in. Leaves went from green to a rusty blaze. The air took on that faint bite of oncoming winter. When Mom texted about Thanksgiving this time, it was different. Mom, we'd like to have you and Daniel here if you're willing. Smaller this year, fewer people, no speeches. Your call. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Last year, I would have driven up out of guilt, armor on, stomach in knots. This year, I took my time. I talked to Daniel on the couch, our legs tangled under a blanket, the TV low in the background. I don't want to go back to pretending, I said. But part of me wants to see if anything's actually different. For Mom, for Rachel, for me. He nodded slowly. We go on your terms, he said. The second you feel that old shrinking starting, we leave. No questions asked. Something in my chest loosened. When I finally wrote back, my fingers didn't tremble. Me. We'll come. But if anyone starts in on truth-telling at other people's expense, we're out. No drama, just done. Mom's reply came quick. Mom. Understood. We want peace, not a show. The word show landed with a small, bittersweet twist. Thanksgiving smelled like it always had. Turkey, onions, the faint lemon of freshly wiped counters. But the house felt quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on an invisible radio. Dad answered the door. No booming greeting. Just a nod, eyes searching my face, then Daniel's. Hey, he said. Glad you came. He stepped back to let us in, not filling the doorway like a toll booth, just moving. In the kitchen, Mom's shoulders were lower, her movements less frantic. There were still good napkins, but no iron burns on her fingers. Rachel chopped carrots at the island, earbuds out, fully present. During dinner, Dad made one joke about the dry white meat and then stopped himself mid-riff. You know, I used to make a big production out of this, he said, to no one in particular. I'm trying something new. He popped a piece of turkey into his mouth and chewed. The conversation flowed around him. Rachel talking about her job, Mom about a book club, Daniel about a bridge project. I added pieces, not as a defender or interpreter, just another voice at the table. At one point, the talk drifted to work. So, Daniel, Uncle Joe said, fork suspended. You miss the Marines at all? Sometimes, Daniel said. But I like building things more than blowing them up now. Must feel weird, Uncle Joe went on. Being married to the Navy. He grinned like he'd landed something clever. Before Daniel could answer, Dad spoke. Feels pretty solid from where I'm sitting, he said. Every head turned. He met my eyes, then Daniel's. Guy leaves his pride at the door, shows up for my daughter, he said. That's more than I did. A lot of years. Doesn't take a uniform to be a real man. The room went very still. I watched the words land. On my uncle, who blinked. On Mom, whose eyes filled so fast she had to look down at her plate. On Daniel, who swallowed hard and gave the smallest of nods. Thanks, Tom, Daniel said quietly. Dad took a breath. Dawn, he muttered, out of habit, then shook his head. Sorry, Daniel. You're doing right by her. I see it. The rest of the meal moved on, but something had shifted. The pedestal he'd once reserved for himself had a new occupant. Accountability. Christmas came, then spring. Life kept moving. Orders, drills, clinic shifts, oil changes, dentist appointments. Big conversations slotted between grocery runs and catching up on sleep. Dad didn't become a different person overnight. He slipped. He told a story at church that painted our wedding as dramatic, then called me afterward to say, I shouldn't have said it that way. I made it about me again. It shocked me more than the original comment. He asked questions about my deployments that sounded, for the first time, more like curiosity than challenge. Weren't you scared? He asked one evening, when it was just the two of us nursing coffee at the diner. Yeah, I said. A lot. He nodded slowly. I always told you not to be, he said. Somewhere along the line, I started believing my own nonsense. Like being afraid made you weak. Watching you that night at the wedding. He trailed off, fingers drumming the mug. You were scared, he said. But you stood there anyway. I don't think I've ever done that. You enlisted, I pointed out. You took care of us when I was little. Yeah, he said. And then I spent too many years taking care of myself at the horseshoe table. He looked at me. I can't change that, he said. But I can clap at the right times now. We sat in silence, the din of the diner wrapping around us. It wasn't a Hallmark moment. It was better. It was honest. The test came the following summer at a cousin's wedding. Different hall, same DJ company, same smell of roast something and cheap champagne and perfume. I watched Dad the way a safety officer watches a pressure gauge. During speeches, he laughed at jokes that weren't his. He wiped his eyes when the groom's father talked about mistakes and second chances. At one point, the DJ caught his eye and gestured to the mic, a reflex like habit itself. Dad's hand lifted halfway, stopped. He shook his head. Then he turned, deliberately, to me. His look wasn't a plea, it was a question. Do you want it? I smiled. I shook my head. Not tonight. We ate the cake, we danced. When the band took a break, he wandered over to where I was standing with Daniel, looking at the lights strung over the patio. You know, he said, I used to think the person with the mic was the most powerful one in the room. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. These days, he added, I'm starting to think, maybe it's the one who can walk away from it. I glanced at him. Or the one who can pass it to the right person, I said. He smiled, tired and genuine. Yeah, he said, that too. He patted Daniel's shoulder, gentle this time, not performative. Take care of her, he said. Always, Daniel replied. Dad nodded at me. And you, he said, keep taking care of you. The line landed in a place inside me that used to be filled entirely by his opinion. Now, it was just one brick in a bigger wall. Later that night, back at our own place, I took off my shoes in the hallway and paused beneath the two photos on the wall. The Navy graduation and the wedding one. The girl in the first had been desperate for her father's approval. The woman in the second had learned to build a life without it. Now there was a third image in my mind. Me at that reception, mic in hand, voice steady. I switched off the hall light. The house fell into soft darkness, filled with the sound of Daniel brushing his teeth, the hum of the fridge, the quiet, ordinary life we'd fought for. The story with my father wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like we were finally on the same page, or at least reading from the same book. Tomorrow there would be new conversations, new slips, new apologies. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, I went to sleep without replaying old birthdays or bracing for new blows. I'd taken the mic. He'd started to listen. The rest would be work. But now it was work I chose. A year after the wedding, I found myself on the other side of a microphone. Different hall, different crowd, same nervous flutter in my chest. Only this time, it wasn't fear of being cut down, it was the odd, humbling weight of being asked to stand up. The base auditorium smelled like stale coffee and floor polish. Rows of uniforms rustled as junior sailors and Marines settled into their seats. A banner hung crooked at the front. Women in leadership, owning your voice. I smoothed my khaki blouse with damp palms and stepped up to the podium. The mic was cool in my hand. Good afternoon, I said. I'm Lieutenant Naomi Briggs, United States Navy, and before I ever learned how to brief a CO, I learned how to survive a dinner table. A few heads snapped up at that. I talked, carefully, without names, about growing up in a house where honesty meant humiliation, where jokes were knives, and where the loudest person always got the last word. I talked about learning a different kind of leadership from chiefs who corrected without cruelty, officers who owned their mistakes in front of the room. I told them in outline about a wedding reception where I finally took the mic back. You don't have to wait for some dramatic balloon drop of a moment, I said. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll do is say, that's not okay, in a quiet kitchen, or decide not to answer a call when you know you're only being dialed to be blamed. In the second row, a young corpsman with dark circles under her eyes nodded so hard her bun wobbled. Afterward, a line formed. One petty officer said, My dad does the same I'm just telling the truth thing. And I watched the relief in her shoulders when I told her that boundary wasn't betrayal. Another Marine with tear-bright eyes asked, How did you know you wouldn't blow up your whole family? And I was honest, I hadn't. I just knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to keep someone else comfortable. When the auditorium emptied, the mic lay on its side on the podium. I picked it up and set it gently in its stand. Tools aren't good or bad. They do what the hand holding them chooses. I chose. Life settled into its own rhythm. Daniel and I eventually left the rental behind for a small, two-bedroom house with a sagging porch swing and enough wall space for too many photos. We hung my Navy graduation picture first, then our wedding photo, mid-laugh, no microphones in sight. Later, another frame joined them. My father on that same porch swing, eyes crinkled, a grandbaby on his knee, both of them sticky with popsicle. The first time I watched him catch himself, a joke starting, then swallowed, I felt an old instinct flare. To jump in, smooth it over, fill the gap. I didn't. I watched him take a different path. You can cry if you want, he told my son when a skinned knee brought tears. Hurts, huh? Doesn't make you weak. Just means you're human. The words landed in me like a small, soft explosion. Later, when we were doing dishes and the kitchen smelled like dish soap and leftover spaghetti, I said, "You know you rewrote something when you said that, right?" He shrugged, embarrassed. "Therapist says I'm allowed to try again," he muttered. "Figure I'd start with the grandkid. Easier audience." "You're wrong," I said. "We're both harder and worth it." He smiled, tired and proud. "Yeah," he said. "You sure proved that." Not every moment was tidy. There were slips, sulks, arguments. Old grooves are easy to fall into when you're tired or scared. But we had a new rule now, no pretending. If he said something that crossed the line, I named it. If I overreacted because it brushed an old bruise, I owned that and stepped back instead of making Daniel referee. We learned a new choreography. Sometimes that meant stepping away from holiday dinners early. Sometimes it meant letting silence fall and staying in the room anyway, letting everyone sit with their discomfort instead of racing to plaster it over. The difference was, I wasn't shrinking to fit anymore. I was choosing where to stand. One evening, years later, I walked back into a banquet hall that smelled like roast meat and buttercream and coffee, and I didn't feel my chest tighten. It was our 10th anniversary. Friends from the unit, neighbors, a few family members sat at round tables under soft lights. There was a cake, not lemon this time, but chocolate, and a DJ who'd been briefed. No surprise speeches, no open mic. During dessert, Rachel clinked her spoon against her glass. "Don't worry, I cleared this," she said, eyes dancing. 2 minutes, tops. She told a quick story about me in high school, showing up with a toolbox when her car wouldn't start, and ended with, "She's always been the one who shows up. Now she finally lets people show up for her." People clapped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dad watching, hands folded, no fidgeting, no grab for the mic. When the applause faded, he stood. For a heartbeat, my body flashed cold. Then I saw what he was holding. Not a microphone, his glass. He cleared his throat. "Short one," he said. "Promise." He looked at me and Daniel. "I used to think my job as a father was to keep control," he said. "To be the loudest voice, to toughen you up." He shook his head. "Turns out she was the one teaching me," he said. "She just had to take the mic away before I could hear it." A murmur of soft laughter. He raised his glass. "To Naomi and Daniel," he said. "To a marriage built on respect, not fear. And to my daughter, who finally showed me what real strength looks like." He sat down, no extra dig, no rim shot, just that. The sound that followed wasn't nervous laughter or shocked silence. It was simple, warm applause. I met his eyes. We both knew how far we'd come to get here. After the party, we stood alone in the empty hall for a minute. The air smelled like extinguished candles and mop water. The DJ packed his cables in the corner. "You know the difference between that toast and your first one?" I asked. He winced. Not calling my son-in-law an idiot," he said. "That," I said, smiling. "And this, the first one was about you. This one said, wasn't." He nodded slowly. "Feels better," he said, less loud in my head. We walked out together. Daniel held the door. The night air was cool against my face. On the drive home with our kid asleep in the back, head lolling, sticky with frosting and joy, I watched the dark road slide under the headlights and thought about all the ways my life could have gone. The version where I stayed silent and shrank until I could barely recognize myself. The version where I cut my father out completely, let anger calcify into a monument. The version I was living, somewhere in between. Boundaries and a crack in the door, truth and the possibility of change. It hadn't been clean, it hadn't been easy, but it was mine. Back at the house, after we carried a sleeping kid to bed and kicked off our shoes in the hall, I paused under the line of photos. Past, present, the woman in uniform, the bride with the mic, the mother holding a toddler, all in one frame. Daniel slipped an arm around my waist. "Worth it?" he asked. I thought about the quiet in my chest where panic used to live, about the junior sailors who now came into my office and said, "Ma'am, I told my dad no for the first time," and about Grandma Henderson, who'd hugged me in the grocery store and whispered, "You gave me words from my own husband." About my father, standing in that hall with his hands wrapped around a glass instead of a microphone, learning how to use his voice without using it as a weapon. "Yeah," I said, "worth it." I switched off the hallway light. The photos vanished into shadow, but I could still feel them looking on. My voice didn't have to be the loudest in the room anymore. It just had to be true. Truth ends the performance. Respect keeps the story going.